Wagwan, good morning, good night, welcome back. And if you're listening for the first time, welcome to episode 13 of The Real Situation, where we give you a taste of Jamaican politics. I'm your host, Melanie Byfield, and in this series we are focusing on Jamaica's journey to becoming a republic. Just a reminder of where we are. During 62 years of independence, Jamaica stopped and started its journey on the road to transitioning from a constitutional monarchy to a constitutional republic. In 2022, the independence journey restarted. You may ask yourself, why now? But why not? Obviously, the independence journey not done. Jamaica's executive is an English king. The second schedule of the Jamaica Constitution Ordering Council 1962, which granted Jamaica independence and which represents the highest law of the land, is a colonial document. And Jamaica's highest court of appeal is the King's Privy Council in London. This is the first of 3 phases of constitutional reform. Right now we're in the midst of phase 1, focusing on changes to the deeply entrenched provisions of the Constitution, and this pretty much involves 3 things. The first is amending the 1962 Ordering Council and Jamaicanizing it into a Jamaican constitution by the people, of the people, and for the people. Little side note, as content becomes available, I do provide updates on the proposed constitution by We the People Republic Jamaica. I was watching a podcast this week by Haile Mikhail Cudjoe of We the People Republic Jamaica, celebrating the Honourable Winston Hubert McIntosh OM, aka Peter Tosh. It was his birthday, and Cudjoe was highlighting sections of the proposed constitution, which is now in its 16th version, one of which was that weed would be legalised. 16 versions, that means to me that, they're listening and they're incorporating input along the way, and that's a good thing. So anyway, legalise it. That's what Peter Tosh was saying a long time, right? An interesting fact. New Mexico, the state of New Mexico, has a population of just under 2.5 million people. They just topped sales of $1 billion in weed sales, 75 million of which is going to taxes. In Jamaica right now, weed is legal for medicinal use and decriminalised for up to 2 ounces, but it's not legal for recreational use. Yeah, you heard me right. I gotta say it one more time. In Jamaica right now, weed is legal for medicinal use and decriminalised for up to 2 ounces, but it is not legal for recreational use. Nigel Clark, Finance Minister, soon to be not, did state this week that the Jamaican economy is expected to contract by 0.2% for the current fiscal year, owing in part to low tourism growth arising from the travel advisory from the United States in the first quarter of 2024, as well as the impact of Hurricane Beryl in July. So, back to the proposed constitution of We the People Republic. It's a brand new document, not an amendment, and I quote from that constitution, proposed constitution, it's to create a new and glorious history for ourselves and for our future generations that will increase our self-esteem, dignity, and integrity. Yeah, so those 3 things that phase 1 involves, right? Amending the Constitution, amending the imperial document to become a Jamaican constitution. The second thing would be removing the monarchy as head of state, that is King Charles III, and replacing him with a Jamaican head of state and transforming Jamaica from a constitutional monarchy into a constitutional republic. And then thirdly, since the proposed amendments are deeply entrenched, the Order in Council of 1962 requires a referendum to be held for the people of Jamaica to say yes or no to a bill housing those proposed amendments, which has to pass a 2/3 majority in both houses. Right, so that requires consensus by the opposition in the Senate, since the government has the 2/3 majority that's needed in the House. Continuing with our update, right? The 15-member Constitutional Reform Committee submitted a May 2024 report of recommendations, which has been tabled in Parliament as a ministry paper. And Mark Golding, the leader of the opposition, prepared a document outlining several issues that concern the PNP and others, right? Things like the appointment of the president, the omission of an impeachment provision, right? But the biggest one is relating to Jamaica's final court of appeal, the argument being that Jamaica won't be fully independent while retaining the Privy Council in London. And so the PNP are advocating for the Caribbean Court of Justice to replace it. So since tabling the report, the government has committed itself to a ramped up public engagement campaign. So in that respect, there is one new item to report on. There was a town hall that was held in the Caribbean, held at the Caribbean Maritime Museum in Kingston. And that was on Tuesday, October the 1st. It was attended by Marlene Malahoo Fort, the chairperson, and she confirmed that the process is really to further the goals of independent Jamaica, and each stage has been met with mixed results, but the journey continues, right? Those are Ms. Malahoo Fort's words. She reminded people, and here I'm speaking from the article. It's actually an article by Andrew Laidley in the on JIS.gov. She's reminding people that a phased approach is being undertaken, focused on those two primary objectives, right? To Jamaicanize the Constitution and to transition Jamaica from a constitutional monarchy to a constitutional republic, separating from monarchy and having a president as head of state. She also noted that the changes to the deeply entrenched provisions in the Constitution necessitate a referendum, and as such she's urging all Jamaicans who are eligible to make sure they can vote in a referendum and actively engage in shaping Jamaica's future. So as a side note, the deadline to register for the next voters list, which will be published in November, was on September 30th. So the next opportunity to make sure that your name is on, so the voters list after that is May 31st, 2025. The deadline is March 31, 2025. So that pretty much would be the last opportunity to be registered to vote before the next general election, unless it's called sooner. So if you haven't registered to vote yet, you need to do so by March 31 next year. That way you'll be published in the May 31, 2025 voters list. So in transitioning from a constitutional monarchy to a constitutional republic, the CRC recommended in its report that Jamaica should retain the parliamentary system. So what is a parliamentary system? It's one of the oldest forms of democracy. It dates back centuries. Modern examples are countries like the UK, Japan, Sweden, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Pakistan and India. it's actually one of the more common forms of governments in most first world nations. And how does it work? So a parliamentary government is where the laws and primary decisions of a country are made by a governing body known as the Parliament. So this system, in this system, the monarch sought the advice. So its origins are in England, where the monarch sought the advice of a council or established and high-ranking people before they could make laws. However, as the years and centuries went on, this council grew to become more powerful and gradually restricted the governing abilities of the monarch. England's monarchs became further restricted by the council, whose permission they now had to seek in order to collect taxes and pass certain laws. The council soon developed into parliament. So how did Jamaica come to have a parliamentary system? Chapter 5, Part 1, Section 34 of the Order in Council 1962 establishes Parliament, which consists of the British monarch, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. There are 21 senators who are appointed by the Governor-General, 13 on the advice of the Prime Minister and 8 on the advice of the opposition. And there are 63 members of Parliament who are directly elected by Jamaican citizens that are eligible to vote. And then, the other part is the British monarch, in this case, King Charles. So what does Jamaica look like under a Westminster system? So there's a head of state, which is the monarch, King Charles, who is represented by the Governor-General, Sir Patrick Allen. There's usually an executive, there is an executive, which is the Prime Minister and a cabinet. There's the legislature, which is Parliament. There is a judiciary and an opposition. So let's talk about the executive, which is the Prime Minister and the cabinet. So when a new government is elected, or when there's a vacancy for the office of the Prime Minister, the Governor-General appoints, as the Prime Minister, the member of the House of Representatives who, in the Governor-General's judgment, is best able to command the confidence of the majority of the members of the House. And in more real terms, it's the leader of the winning party when the general election occurs, right? So what does the Prime Minister do? The Prime Minister forms and presides over the cabinet. He or she in this case, advises the King on the appointment of the Governor-General, and he advises the Governor-General on the appointment of the 6 members of the Privy Council, on the dissolution of Parliament, and on appointments of the Chief Justice, who's currently Brian Sykes, the President of the Court of Appeal, who is currently the Honourable Mrs. Justice Martha MacDonald Bishop, and the 3 service commissions, which are the public, the police, and the judicial. In the case of the appointments of the senior members of the judiciary and the service commissions, however, the Prime Minister's advice is given after consultation with the leader of the opposition. The Cabinet is the centre of the system of government. It initiates government policies and programmes and is responsible for the general direction and control of the government. The Cabinet must consist of the Prime Minister and not less than 11 other ministers, and there is no upper limit that is specified. Not more than 4 ministers must be appointed from the Senate, and they may have portfolio, that is specific job responsibilities. So what does the current cabinet look like? It's made up of Horace Chang, he's the Deputy Prime Minister and also the Minister of National Security under that ministry. There is Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith. She's the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. Dr. Nigel Clark, Minister of Finance and the Public Service. Minister of Dr. Christopher Tufton, Minister of Health and Wellness. Delroy Chuck, Minister of Justice. Favour Williams, Minister of Education and Youth. Darrell Vaz, Minister of Science, Energy and Telecommunications and Transport. Floyd Green, Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining. Desmond Mackenzie, Minister of Local Government and Community Development. Senator Auburn Hill, Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Olivia Grange, she's Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports. Edmund Bartlett, Minister of Tourism. Pernell Charles, Minister of Labour and Social Security. Marley Malahoo Fort, she's Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs. And there is Derek McCoy, who is the Attorney General. So the legislature is unicameral, if that's the right way to say it, unicameral, meaning it has two houses. It is made up of the Senate, which is also called the upper house, and the House of Representatives, which is also known as the lower house, and the British monarch. That's the legislature, right? The Governor-General represents the monarch in Parliament once a year. At the official opening of Parliament, the Governor-General delivers the throne speech. Beyond this, his parliamentary function is limited to the formal assent of bills that have been passed by the two houses. The maximum life of a parliament is 5 years, at the end of which the parliament must be dissolved and a general election held. However, the Prime Minister can advise the Governor-General to dissolve the parliament at any time within the 5 years and name a date for a general election. Also, Parliament must be dissolved and a general election held if a majority of all members of the House of Representatives support a no confidence motion against the government. So speaking of no confidence motions, Mark Golding brought one on October 1 against the Prime Minister, but it was blocked by the Deputy Speaker. The Speaker had apparently stepped out. It was blocked on the grounds that the matter is being litigated since the Prime Minister is seeking judicial review in relation to the Integrity Commission's report into his, following an investigation into his statutory declarations, which haven't been filed for the last 3 years. Well, which haven't been certified for the last 3 years. Apparently they have been filed, but they are unable to be certified. And there's actually a hearing, the first hearing on this judicial review is due to take place on November 7. There are some key positions within Parliament. So we know that there are senators. There are 21, 8 from the JLP, 13 from the JLP and 8 from the PNP. Who are those senators? For the Jamaica Labour Party, there is Tom Tavares Finson. He is the president of Parliament. There is Auburn Rochester Hill, Kamina Johnson-Smith, Matthew Samuda, who actually resigned from the cabinet and was recently elected MP for North East St. Anne. Right, that was September 30th, 2024. He got 4,838 votes with an 11.6% voter turnout. The independent candidate David Anderson got 222 votes, and Chase Neal of the UIC received 30. Continuing on with our list of senators: Dana Morris Johnson, Abkar Fitz Henley, Ransford Braham, Cavan Gale, Sophia Longmore, Shireen Campbell, Charles Sinclair, Don Waby, who is CEO of Grace Kennedy, and Delroy Williams. The PNP senators are Peter Bunting, he's the leader of opposition business, Donna Scott Motley, she's a member of the Constitutional Reform Committee, Floyd Morris, he became the first blind member of Parliament, of the Senate, when he was appointed in 1998, Damien Crawford, he lost the East Portland race for MP to Anne-Marie Vaz in 2019. He's Shadow Minister for Education, and the person now challenging that East Portland seat is Isaac Buchanan, son of Big Ute, attorney of Vibes Cartel. Carrying on with PNP senators, Gabriella Morris, she's the youngest in Jamaican history at the age of 23. Sophia Fraser-Binns, she's the Shadow Minister for Land, Environment and Climate Change, Lambert Brown, and Janice Allen. And as we discussed before, there are 63 members of Parliament. That's actually the maximum permitted under the Constitution. There is also the judiciary. So the finance minister's highlighting of the courts came in response to concerns outlined this week by Chief Justice Brian Sykes in relation to the poor condition of courthouses across the island. The finance minister said that he was told a couple of years ago that there were no new courthouses that had been erected in Jamaica since independence in 1962, and he had initiated a process for the construction of new structures. Yeah, we'll see. Okay, so there's also an opposition. Right, they play generally an adversarial role, presenting arguments against the government policies. Right. And there is the Speaker of the House, who just happens to be the wife of the Prime Minister. Her name is Juliet Holness. The job of the Speaker is to see that other members keep within the rules of the House, that the rights of the opposition members are protected, and that every member gets a fair hearing. So what does the CRC report say about retaining this parliamentary cabinet system? It has a table which highlights, some differences, but, generally, parliamentary governments have a prime minister, not a president, and their roles are not exactly the same either. Right, a Prime Minister's role is to serve as the most senior member of the executive branch of government. He first needs to be elected by the people as a member of Parliament, and then is selected by Parliament to take on the role of the Prime Minister. But as we said before, it's usually the leader of that party, right, who assumes that role. When you're leading the party and you win the election, you are generally the Prime Minister. By contrast, the president of a democracy, so for example the United States, is not part of the legislature, but rather is elected separately by the people to work with the legislature. There are different forms of parliamentary governments. There's a constitutional monarchy, where a country retains a monarch as a ceremonial head of state. There is a parliamentary republic where the country has a largely ceremonial head of state. And instead of run by an elected head of government who usually comes from the legislature, and is instead run by an elected head of government who usually comes from the legislature. An example of this is Germany. There's also a constitutional republic, which is Jamaica's intention, where a non-executive head of state and you have a non-executive head of state and a government where the people elect representatives to exercise power, but the government is limited by a written constitution. So, as mentioned, a parliamentary system is a popular form of democracy, and you know it's quite popular, right? Most European countries are now run by parliamentary governments, although a presidential system seems more favoured in South American countries. While parliamentary governments themselves seem here to stay for a while, there's a possibility of constitutional monarchies slowly losing favour. Antigua and Barbuda, Belize, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the Bahamas are all contemplating separating from the monarchy. Barbados, Dominica, Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana are Caribbean countries which have done that already. And there's also the argument in Britain where every now and then there's a poll as to whether people want to retain the monarchy. So the CRC concluded in their report that the parliamentary system is a more stable democracy, and that the poor record of the presidential system in the preservation of democracy and protection of the people against dictatorship is well documented. I read an article recently by Professor Emeritus Trevor Monroe, one of the Caribbean's leading public scholars, who's currently the Principal Director of National Integrity Action, right? The Jamaican chapter of Transparency International. Professor Monroe has a distinguished record as an academic in civil society, advocacy, and in public service, and was awarded the Order of Distinction Commander Class in 2015. Jamaica has 6 of those formal recognitions. 6 of them. Going in order, there is the Order of National Hero, that's the highest. The Order of the Nation, ON. The Order of Excellence, OE. The Order of Merit, OM. That's what I mentioned with Peter Tosh just a little while ago. The Order of Jamaica, OJ, and the Order of Distinction, which can be either the Commander Class or the Officer Class. The Order of Distinction may be conferred upon any citizen of Jamaica who renders outstanding and important services to Jamaica, the motto of the order being distinction through service. Thank you for your service, Professor Monroe. So this article, it was published in the Jamaica Gleaner, April 9, 2021, and was entitled From Parliamentary Democracy to Prime Ministerial Government? ? So it addressed the amendment of the Disaster Risk Management Act during COVID. Professor Monroe says, and I quote, to the extent that the amended DRMA, right, the Disaster Risk Management Act, gives to the Prime Minister the power, without any parliamentary approval whatsoever, to determine what is a criminal offence under the Act and to decide the penalties to attach to such an offence, this is in serious conflict with Jamaica's democratic parliamentary system and reinforces an unacceptable tendency toward prime ministerial government. The authority of the Parliament to approve or disapprove executive or prime ministerial orders which create criminal offences should not be abandoned in this legislation or any other. To be clear, the inclination to give the Prime Minister authority over and independently of the Parliament, as well as to limit the Parliament's power to hold the Prime Minister accountable was present and was resisted at the very foundation of independent Jamaica. Again, I go back to the fact that the CRC concluded in their report that the parliamentary system is a more stable democracy, and that the poor record of the presidential system in the preservation of democracy and protection of people against dictatorship is well documented. Professor Monroe continues in this article with the next paragraph entitled Strengthen Parliamentary Democracy. He says, during the course of the 30 years following independence, many of our political leaders, most notably Edward Seaga, P.J. Patterson and Bruce Golding, civil society organisations, the 1992 Constitutional Commission, parliamentary committees, and the PNP/JLP election manifestos have been making significant proposals to curb prime ministerial government, strengthen parliamentary democracy, and increase public participation. Among these proposals are to fix the date of general elections and remove the power of the Prime Minister to determine when an election should be held within that 5-year period, to limit the number of terms that the Prime Minister can serve, to limit the number of MPs that the Prime Minister can appoint to the Cabinet, thereby increasing the number of members of Parliament not belonging to the executive, to strengthen the position in the standing orders for MPs to ask and have questions answered, as well as to have private members' motions debated, to oblige the Prime Minister to respond to petitions signed by a representative number of citizens, which was actually introduced in 2017. Now a petition must reach 15,000 signatures within 40 days to receive a response from the Office of the Prime Minister. And then number 6 was to establish a mechanism to allow citizens to ask the Prime Minister questions directly and to interact with him or her face to face. He basically concludes by saying that even in a pandemic, it's unacceptable to do the right thing, but do it in the wrong way. As you may or may not know, the finance minister took a job as the deputy managing director at the IMF in DC, and he's going to be leaving at the end of the month. On a personal note, I'm assuming the reason that Nigel only gave a month's notice is because there's a deputy finance minister, whose name is not Andrew Holness, ready to take the reins, right? Until such time as his replacement is announced. But he did give what is being termed as a valedictory speech on Wednesday, October 16. And I'm going to quote from part of what was written in that article in the Jamaica Gleaner, where it says that 75 billion garnered through the nation's first ever securitization transaction in international capital markets as a key reason for the government's ability to follow through on planned capital spending without incurring additional debt. The transaction involved the securitization of the portion of Norman Manley International revenue that is due to the government for the next 12 years. Julian Robinson, the shadow minister for the opposition, added, "If we are frank, the securitization is a reflection of that anemic growth. The fact that you have to use future revenues to fund current activities, or even eat the bread of sad tomorrow, as my brethren Bob would say." Advocates claim that by responding more readily to the will of the people, that the parliamentary system is the more democratic than the presidential alternative. I'm sure many people will agree that the will of the people is for a more participatory democracy, right? Where every Jamaican feels empowered to contribute to the nation's future. Not a Babylon system, a vampire sucking the children day by day. I hope you're continuing to enjoy this journey, finding it educational and useful, and looking forward to our continued travels on the road to becoming a republic, truly independent and sovereign together. And yes, I'm still confident that the Brugdon Porsche is going to get fixed. Not giving up, right? If you want to reason about anything, anything in this episode or any other episodes, or if you can't find any of the material that I was talking about, you can email me on atasteofja@outlook.com. You can also find this podcast on YouTube, Buzzsprout, Spotify, Podcast Index, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Apple, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. So until the next time, I thank you for supporting this podcast and ask that you please share it with friends and family. And again, I thank you for taking the time to listen. One love.